The masculine provides structure and parameters and boundaries and foundation. And if there is a weakness in your structure and your integrity, then that weakens you and it weakens you for others. You're listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to championing everyday men and supporting you in getting more from life, love, and the everyday. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and the aim of this podcast is pretty simple: to support you in building rock-solid foundations, legendary integrity, and kick-ass relationships with plenty of stories, a load of lessons, and a solid dose of some loving straight talk. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Legends podcast. This is me, your host, Mike Campbell. And if you are new here, welcome. Awesome. What brought you here? Please let me know. Today I'm going to talk about integrity. So maybe that's what brought you here. Now, I have a previous episode that I dove heavily into the subject and idea and concept and practicalities of integrity. I think episode 9 it was, if you go back and search through. Today I want to share a short piece on a kind of a question that came up, and I see this kind of thing come up a lot in men, where the belief, confusion, misunderstanding perhaps around integrity being this incredibly rigid thing. So there's a kind of a response that I got in an email, which I'm going to kind of paraphrase a little bit, that someone shared that kind of started me thinking on this, which I see a lot, and so I wanted to speak about it. The gentleman said that in attempting to not lose a person he cared about, he tried upholding his integrity. And what he said was it doesn't feel worth it to be so rigid. Now, I don't know what the context is and all the things that happened in there, but the word that he's used there is this word rigid. It doesn't feel worth it to be so rigid. The extension of that, based on what he said, was because to uphold my integrity is to be rigid. But it's not. This is the challenge that we often meet when it comes to understanding integrity. So again, my previous episode will speak to integrity a lot. I'm going to condense it really, really quickly. Here's my take on what integrity is. It is living my life through my words and actions, and in some level thoughts, but we have many thoughts that we can't control. They're there. It's what we do with the thoughts, right? Living my life in alignment with my strongest values. And so what that first of all requires me to do is understand my values. And that's not just to sit down for 5 minutes and list some things that you value. It is that, and it's more, because it actually invites me to deeply understand what my values are, where they come from. Like, how did these things come about in my life? We're in the context of the work that we do in Everyday Legends Academy, we use this term called villains. Villains really just being a quick summary for kind of the manifestation in us and our behaviors of our deepest wounds and, often childhood unmet needs, and therefore kind of our deepest fears and insecurities come to life, and behaviors that help us prevent those kinds of experiences from happening again. And so what we might look at when we understand what do you value, one question that's really quickly going to cut to the chase of that is, where do you spend your time, energy, and money? And what we'll tend to see there is what you have been valuing, not necessarily what your deepest, to use the term in this podcast, everyday legend version of you values, right? The Zeus energy part of you, what those top values are. So figuring out values takes investigation, exploration, curiosity, experimentation. Like, you got to run the experiment, live them, reflect, change, adapt, experiment, get feedback. That is an ongoing thing. Integrity is about living in alignment with your values. Now, when we look at a structure, the integrity of that structure, if there is a weakness in the integrity, then there is a weakness in the structure, in the strength of the structure. And so you, my man, gentleman listening, are a structure, both for yourself and for those around you. The masculine provides structure and parameters and boundaries and foundation. And if there is a weakness in your structure and your integrity, then that weakens you and it weakens you for others, right? But strength isn't just about being rigid. We could look at someone who perhaps has a difficult relationship with alcohol, let's say. And it's not necessarily that alcohol is the problem, it's the relationship to themselves, that alcohol is kind of the conduit for them to switch off and avoid things and all these kind of things. And so on some level, for a lot of people, it's easier just to go, quote, rigid and not have alcohol, because then I can kind of lean on that. I just don't go near it. What can be harder for some people, require more strength, is to change the relationship to alcohol and explore 1 to 2 drinks, and change the word alcohol for anything, right? Probably not certain things like meth or heroin, but regardless of what the thing is, we all use things to distract, numb, avoid things in our lives. What's often stronger is to be able to play in the nuance. That's more challenging. So strength isn't, I think it's really about rigidity. And that's where integrity comes in. So here's an idea that I want you to think of. Regardless of where you live, there's probably some cities where you live or near where you live that have tall buildings. Very, very tall buildings. I like to go straight to Japan, but you can go anywhere. In Japan, and many other places around the world that have a lot of earthquakes, and there is high earthquake risk, they still build incredibly tall buildings. And so those buildings need to be monumentally strong. They have to have utmost integrity, or they would fall over and everyone in them and around them would fucking die. But because of how the earth moves underneath, because of how, as an individual, things challenge us, shake our foundations, the building has to have a level of flexibility to maintain its strength. If it was rigid, it would snap when the earth rolled and moved and rumbled. There has to be a level of flexibility to maintain the strength in that integrity. Now, in other places around the world, it's not necessarily the earth moving, but it's the atmosphere, what's happening around it. At the top of the building is often when they're subject to the highest winds. They need to be able to adapt for, manage, navigate those winds. Again, that level of flexibility in the structure is what helps it stay strong. It's part of the integrity, not rigidity, but flexibility. So that's one of the things that we often miss as men, that integrity needs flexibility. And so that will play out in many ways, big, medium, small. But often that might look at, or invite us to look at, our values. What do I value? What ones are more important in any given moment? So I'm going to start with a really small example. And that is, let's say, because one of the things I can explore when it comes to my values, my integrity, is also, am I following through on my major commitments? But my addition to that for you is this: my promises and my commitments. So that could be like my to-do list. Here's my 5 things on my to-do list today, and I got them done. Great. But if you're not doing the things that are of most importance to you and your values just for the sake of your to-do list, then that's kind of missing the point. Your values therefore become your kind of life's to-do list. And then the things that you actually do with your life, and the things that you add to your task lists and so on during the day, one would hope, if we were to remain in integrity and have real strength, align with, fit into your core values. And so my promises or commitments, my values. So let's say I highly value my health. Now I do. I actually place performance as a greater value, because for me, how I define performance is my ability to show up and perform mentally, emotionally, and physically across all areas of my life. My physical health is a big part of that. My mental and emotional health is a big part of that. My financial and relational health is a big part of that. So part of that piece of health and performance is exercising, training, working out. So let's say there's a day where I have committed to a gym session, and then in that moment, maybe like today, when it's a Wednesday and it's my morning, when Nadia is looking after Kaya and getting her breakfast and fed and all that kind of stuff, and I train. And then this morning I had the opportunity to interview someone for a podcast, someone where that was the only time we could do that based on our time differences and schedules and all this kind of stuff. So what I had to do in that moment was ask myself, do I forego my commitment to myself and my health and my value of health in this training session? Or do I bump it and have this interview? Am I out of integrity if I abandon my workout and my commitment to my health? And when I zoom out, I can look at it and go, well, first of all, one workout doesn't make a healthy lifestyle or not. So I can train later that day, potentially I can train tomorrow. And even if I don't, it's not the end of the world. I'm still committed to my health, and it shows up, and I execute on that in many, many ways. But in that moment, what I'm also very much committed to is growth, my own growth, the growth of men that I work with, that listen to my podcast, that, you know, come into my kind of orbit, supporting men and understanding themselves better, supporting men in exploring their pain and the shit that they've gone through so they can metabolize it, work through it, get to the other side of it, and stop that creating pain and shit for others, and championing men. And this podcast episode was an opportunity for me to do a bunch of those things. So it kind of becomes a no-brainer in that moment. I'll do that podcast interview. The gym thing can wait, can get bumped, and so on. But it's also an invitation not to just put it to the background and go, I'll do it some other time, maybe, but actually make commitments with myself. Fairly simple, fairly small. It could be another situation where I've committed to a call, and maybe I've got a coaching call with a client, and then, you know, it's about to start and my sister rings up or something, and she's like, I really need to talk to you. I'm in, you know, I've got a very terrible situation, whatever it is, I need some support. And I'm sitting here going, okay, and I've got to do a coaching call and I have a commitment with that person and so on. How do I navigate this? I have the conversations. What's more important in this moment? My sister, who desperately needs my support right now, or my coaching client? Hard to say. So I can go down that rabbit hole and explore that. Call my client, message them, hey, this is something happened urgently. Are you okay if we move it? Yes, no, I'm not. Okay. I get to have those conversations. You know what? I know you can't move it. I'm going to make it up to you another time. At the moment, my sister has to take priority, or whatever that situation is. It's the ability to flex. It doesn't step me out of integrity unless I'm stepping out of integrity. And this invites me to be brutally honest with myself. So now I want to go to what I would call a bigger example when it comes to this flexibility, let's call it, and integrity. And this is a specific example, but it's the kind of thing I think that many of us might be able to relate to. Different content, similar context. This was someone who was in my program, and then after a few months, he chose that he wanted to leave. And he not only wanted to leave and get out, he wanted his money back. And he'd paid, and he thought it suitable to question my integrity. Now, the money I wasn't concerned about. Like, I can make more money, right? It's not about giving him back the money. But if you want to question my integrity, then we will certainly have that conversation and dive into that discussion. I am for that. Now, he was a coaching client of mine. Things didn't go as planned for him. I did my utmost to support him within reason and responsibility, right? But my responsibility was to him and not for him. This is something that we're going to explore here. He asked for a refund that went directly against the agreement that we had that he willingly signed. The language in my agreement and around all of it, including expectations, are incredibly clear and purposeful. I don't fuck around with this stuff. So we have clarity. We are clear. That's the point. Now, he asked based on wanting me to be responsible for his choices, which doesn't work. It can never work. And so when he said words to the effect of, for a man who espouses integrity, keeping my money doesn't feel like it has any. And so in that moment, I was torn. Like, it would be really easy for me to wash my hands of this and just give him the money and be done with it. But I had made a commitment to him as his coach. And sometimes that looks and feels very challenging to both parties. Now, in my estimation, and my reflection, didn't take much reflection, he wanted me to be responsible for his choices and misconstrued expectations, despite all of my clear language and our clearly written and signed agreement. And so for me to go along with that actually felt like stepping out of integrity to me. So here's my conundrum. What action do I take? I really wanted him to get the point. His expectations, his choices, his responsibility, his growth. If I'm responsible for his choices, then I'm responsible for his growth. And then it's never his. And that is completely disempowering. And that is not the work of me or a coach with their soul. However, I chose to pay him. So here was my rationale, in short. And what I kind of said to him was, I feel that paying you the money actually pulls me out of integrity on some level. Like I'm giving in to you, not accepting responsibility for your expectations and choices. And therefore, I'm letting you down in my commitment to you. However, I'll do it. I'll pay you that money in the hope that you leave satisfied and actually still go on to do this important work on yourself. What I didn't want was to let me keeping the money from him doing future work on himself, right? And then potentially becoming bitter and impacting him, because my integrity had to flex in that moment because my deeper commitment to him was his growth. And if I kept the money and it prevented him, the individual, from continuing his just journey and self-exploration and growth and where he goes, we kind of lose. So my deeper commitment is not just the initial agreement and monetary exchange. And so we discussed the integrity piece a bit. I made my point, and I can only hope that he got it, because I can tell you right now, it was a lesson that he definitely needed to learn, obviously, in my opinion. And for me, it was a very difficult moment where my integrity felt very challenged. But no one said, and if you're under this illusion, that maintaining integrity is easy, but it can create ease in our lives. And I can sleep at night. I can have a peace within me. Right? It was challenged not to do the easy thing and just pay him, but to do the most effective thing for both of us, to do what seemed most right, most effective. And in the end, I saw the action that I took as a higher piece of integrity for me. You know, my commitment to his growth was ultimately it, in the hope that he would continue the work and dig into that situation and learn from it. And I suspect that if I kept the money and said, too bad, he wouldn't have. And that would have had a greater effect ongoing. Integrity matters. And so just paying him and not talking about it weakens his understanding of integrity and himself, and him owning his choices and growth, as it would similarly weaken me then and in more challenging times. Integrity has to have flexibility. It has to be able to withstand challenges, forces from the ground, forces from within, forces externally. But that isn't rigidity. So I invite you to think about where this kind of example, these kinds of examples, these kinds of challenges and navigating tests of our integrity has played out for you. Let me know. Reach out to me on social media, how this has landed for you, the questions that it's brought up for you, and the examples that you've had or have in your life. And maybe we can support you in understanding these. What I'll leave you with is this. At the heart of all of this is not about me understanding that man, but about me understanding myself. That is always at the heart of this. And that there is the big blind spot that a lot of men have. We think we have an idea of who we are and what we're about, but actually when it comes down to it, a lot of that crumbles. If you want to have the kind of integrity of a 100-story Tokyo skyscraper that is fucking strong, yet flexible, can flex with the forces that come upon it, that will drastically improve your life and the lives of those around you, then it takes work. It takes seeing it And it takes strong forces that can support you in learning that and building that strength. And we have to witness it. And so if you want to explore it and witness it, tap me on the shoulder, knock on my door. It's all available here. And if you want, check out the show notes. We'll drop down there a link where you can start to explore the world of ELA, the Everyday Legends Academy, where this becomes a central pillar of what we do, making you the strong, flexible man that you can be. It's been our show. Until next time. Share it, like it, rate it, hit us up. I trust you get something from this. I used to say this, so we'll say it again. Keep building that legendary integrity. You've been listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to championing everyday men and supporting you in getting more from life, love, and the everyday. If this podcast has benefited you, if you enjoyed this, then my request, my invitation is to share this with a man that you think will also benefit from this and enjoy this. Remember, please, wherever you find your podcast, you like us, subscribe to us, click download first, leave us a review. All those things both make sure you get all the updates when they come in, and it supports us in getting this podcast in front of more everyday men.